Mr. Secretary, your testimony over the last several days before Congress, I've heard you speak about all of your supposed accomplishments from your time at the Pentagon. I have to say, your training at Fox News has let you spin months of dangerous dysfunction and incompetence into catchy phrases like restoring the warrior ethos and increasing lethality. But the truth is, it's really been chaos at the Pentagon under your leadership. You've clearly shown you're unable to manage the Department of Defense.
That hearing wasn't routine. It was a political ambush. Mikie Sherrill didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her cross-examination of Pete Hegseth was so sharp, it stripped away every layer of his defense. What was the accusation? That his incompetence froze critical aid to Ukraine, leaving soldiers exposed on the front lines, not by Russian fire, but by Washington's confusion. The moment was brutal. Hegseth denied everything, but Sherrill hammered back with receipts. And the stunned silence of lawmakers told the whole story. But here's where it spiraled. Less than a month into the job, Hegseth had already purged top generals C.Q. Brown and Lisa Franchetti without cause. A move Sherrill painted as biased at the highest level. Months later, the Navy still lacked a chief because no admiral wanted the job. And then came the money. Billions were wasted on vanity projects while deadlines for the defense budget were missed. A retrofitted jet, a parade, a bombing campaign that achieved nothing. Sherrill tied it all together like a prosecutor laying out the case. Operational failure, managerial chaos, and reckless spending. This wasn't just testimony. It was the live dismantling of a Fox News warrior. And trust me, the fallout is only beginning.
But what I'm most concerned about are three specific areas: your operational incompetence, your managerial incompetence, and your budgetary incompetence. So let's start with operational. According to news reports, in your first week on the job, you got confused in a National Security Council meeting and thought President Trump wanted you to stop all aid to Ukraine. In a well-functioning administration, you would have asked for clarification before making that seismic policy shift, but instead you ordered vital military aid heading to the front lines turned around, costing the U.S. millions of dollars, and depriving Ukrainian soldiers of equipment they needed to fight Russia. So, Mr. Secretary, can you explain how exactly you misunderstood such a monumental presidential order?
One of many fake news headlines we've dealt with.
So, President Trump told you to halt military aid to Ukraine on January 30th?
As is often the case, highly ideological and very ill-informed reporters love to speculate about things they know nothing about in order to spear President Trump and myself.
So it sounds like actually the reporting is correct, because I will say, if it wasn't a mistake, why did aid restart only a few days later?
Again, we would take complete issue with what would some call reporting and others call a hatchet job.
So why did aid start just a couple days later?
I'm saying the reporting is inaccurate, ma'am.
I don't think that's correct. So let's move on to your managerial incompetence. I think we can see why you misunderstood the president, because you're obviously misunderstanding my questions. Less than a month into the job, you fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, C.Q. Brown, and the chief of naval operations, Lisa Franchetti, without cause. And to this day, you still have not provided an adequate explanation for removing them. As far as I can tell, you fired C.Q. Brown because he was black and Lisa Franchetti because she is a woman. So nearly 4 months later, we still don't have a new nominee for Chief of Naval Operations. News reports, and you can contest it, but I'd love to hear your answer, say that you haven't nominated someone because qualified admirals keep turning the position down. So tell me, Mr. Secretary, when will Congress receive your nomination for the next chairman of the next chief of naval operations?
Ma'am, with all due respect, I would suggest not believing every headline you read.
With all due respect, I'd like your nomination. When will we see it?
There has not a single admiral or any military official has turned down a position that's been
So when will we
provided.
see your nominee for the chief of naval operations?
In due time, for all the right reasons.
Again, I think we've seen the managerial incompetence. Okay, let's move on to budgetary incompetence. You missed the deadline to submit a draft defense budget to Congress, which makes it impossible for us to complete our work on the NDAA or appropriations, and makes it more likely you'll receive delays in funding you need for new acquisitions, programs, and other priorities. Additionally, you're blowing money on poorly conceived operations and vanity projects for President Trump. Retrofitting the Qatari jet to serve as Air Force One will cost about $400 million. The parade in D.C. this weekend will cost upwards of $40 million. Your bombing campaign in Yemen cost about $1 billion, and a week later they were having missile strikes in Israel. Your operations in L.A. will cost tens of millions of dollars, and you claim to be cutting costs at the Pentagon, but all I see are wasted dollars better spent addressing our most pressing threats like China. So, Mr. Secretary, what priorities have you cut funding for to pay for these projects?
Ma'am, I would just say your list left off securing the southern border.
So, Mr. Secretary, what priorities have you cut funding for to pay for these projects?
We make trade-offs every day, and I would imagine what we want to spend on is quite different than what the previous administration did.
Well, I think the American
those changes quickly, and they're reflected in this budget, and we're very proud of them.
I think the American people can see why I'm so concerned about this incompetence. Thank you, and I yield back.
The headlines hit before the hearing even ended. Sherrill dismantles Hegseth. The spectacle became the story, and suddenly, the question echoing through Washington wasn't about troop readiness or defense budgets. It was whether Pete Hegseth could even keep his job. For a man who had spent years commanding the camera as a Fox News personality, the fluorescent glare of Congress turned him into the headline he never wanted. The exchange was brutal in its clarity. Sherrill, a former Navy helicopter pilot and federal prosecutor, came armed not just with pointed questions, but with precision strikes. Each fact she cited landed like artillery fire, leaving Hegseth scrambling for words. She pressed him on chaotic firings at the Pentagon, on missed deadlines for defense strategies, and on whispers that sensitive information had been mishandled. Viewers didn't just see a member of Congress questioning a cabinet official. They saw a cross-examination that felt more like a courtroom drama. This wasn't oversight, it was an ambush. And Hegseth walked straight into the trap. Inside the Pentagon, frustration had already been simmering. Officers spoke in hushed tones about the revolving door of aides and advisors. Policies changed with little warning. Budgets ballooned without explanation, and decisions seemed more driven by television headlines than national security strategy. By the time Sherrill's interrogation was broadcast live, those whispers turned into open doubts. Some career officials wondered aloud whether the Pentagon still had steady leadership, or any leadership at all. The ripple effects were immediate. In Moscow and Beijing, adversaries watched the hearing like it was a state gift. Russian analysts described the moment as proof of American disarray. Chinese state media framed it as evidence that Washington was too distracted by internal drama to lead on the world stage. Every stumble by Hegseth became a propaganda tool abroad, used to question the credibility of the U.S. military machine. What Sherrill unleashed in one room shook confidence across the entire globe. Allies, meanwhile, were rattled. Diplomats from Europe to Asia called back to their capitals, reporting on the confrontation. If the Secretary of Defense couldn't answer basic questions without faltering, who was steering America's defense policy? NATO partners worried about funding gaps for joint missions. Pacific allies asked whether commitments against Chinese aggression were still reliable. What should have been an ordinary oversight hearing suddenly turned into an international question mark about America's strength. In Congress, the reaction was electric. Democrats were jubilant, describing Sherrill as the voice of accountability. Even some Republicans shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to publicly defend Hegseth after such a public thrashing. Sherrill walked out of the chamber with the air of a prosecutor who had just won the case of her career. Cameras followed her into the hallway, where her one-liners played on repeat across cable news. Hegseth, on the other hand, looked like the defendant who never saw the verdict coming. It wasn't just a bad day, it was political annihilation in real time. But the damage wasn't just political, it was symbolic. A Fox News personality trying to run the Pentagon had collided with the reality of governing, and the collision was televised for the entire world. The contrast between polished talking points and the gritty demands of leadership couldn't have been starker. Sherrill didn't just expose weaknesses in Hegseth's arguments. She exposed weaknesses in the very idea of putting partisan media figures in charge of national defense. Behind the scenes, aides tried to spin the disaster. They argued Hegseth was caught off guard, that the questions were unfair, that the media was exaggerating. But the video clips told another story. one where a seasoned lawmaker tore apart a man unprepared for the weight of the office he held. On social media, hashtags like #Sherrill exposes Hegseth and #Pentagon chaos trended for days, amplifying the humiliation. Spin can't erase video, and this video was nothing short of a career obituary. And the bigger message, this wasn't about one man's downfall. It was about national security, taxpayer money, and soldiers caught in the crossfire of dysfunction. The Pentagon isn't just another department, it's the backbone of U.S. power, and any hint of chaos there reverberates around the globe. Sherrill's closing line landed like a warning flare, the kind you can see for miles. America can't afford another Fox News experiment running the Pentagon. Her words echoed not just in the chamber, but in headlines, in think tank reports, and in the anxious conversations of allies abroad. Hegseth entered the hearing expecting another skirmish. Instead, he walked out as the symbol of a deeper problem. What happens when showmanship collides with the hard math of national defense? And for Washington, the verdict was clear. The spectacle had become the story, and the story had become a crisis. One hearing, one collapse, one man exposed before the entire world.